You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Tashi Station to pick up some power converters.
Born on Phidia, the youngest brother of 4 sisters on the Outer Rim planet, Zayne Carrick was, by all accounts, unremarkable. His father was a marginally wealthy, if not nondescript banker, and mother was a gardener. Despite his meager roots, Zayne would go on to experience an extraordinary life and cross paths with legendary figures during the Mandalorian Wars. A young Padawan.
Zayne was identified early on as having marginal force sensitivity and was brought to be trained by the Jedi Order on Dantooine. Despite not being particularly adept with the Force, he showed an ability to make friends easily and was taken into the Order despite some hesitation from his mother, Reva, who worried for her son's safety. His training eventually brought him to Taris to study under Jedi Master Lucian Dre at the Jedi Tower, a tall structure that doubled as a Jedi Academy on the world. On Taris, a young Zayne would cross paths with Alec Squinquergesimus, who would later become the infamous Darth Malak. Alec had been recruiting Jedi to join the Revankists against the Mandalorians and sensed Zayne would have a powerful role to play in the near future. Zayne declined the offer as his master and the other Jedi on Taris believed the threat of the return of the Sith to be a much greater concern, and saw the war as a mere distraction.
Shortly after his meeting with Alec, Zayne and his 4 Padawan companions underwent a contest, after which their masters announced a knighting ceremony would take place, but did not announce which candidates had been selected. Zayne, having performed less adequately than his peers, finishing last, doubted he would be selected for ascension to knighthood, but decided to support his peers. However, due to a side errand capturing a notable black marketeer that had long eluded the Padawan, Zayne had arrived late to the knighting ceremony. To his shock and horror, he bore witness to 5 Jedi Masters, including his own Lucian, killing their own Padawans. Masters that had raised and taught the young Jedi aspirants had become their murderers. Filled with the shock and horror, Zayne fled and evaded his masters, fleeing to Taris's underworld with none other than Griff, Hierophant, the Black Marketeer arch-nemesis. Laying low, the Jedi Masters had publicly framed Zayne and Griff for their murders, instigating a galaxy-wide manhunt for the fugitive Jedi and his alleged accomplice. The event would be known as the Padawan Massacre and would burrow itself into the public consciousness as a heinous and depraved act, spurring local authorities to assist the Jedi in bringing the murderer to justice. Denial.
Deeply disturbed by what he had witnessed, Zayne attempted to rationalize what he had seen, even attempting to justify the actions of Jedi Masters, but unable to convince himself as to why they would do such an extreme and heinous act. Attempting to reach out to other Jedi, even Master Vandar Tok'er on the High Council, but to no avail, as Vandar attempted to persuade the fugitive Padawan to turn himself in. Zayne, running out of options and in an increasingly hopeless situation, decided to retrace his journey as a Padawan to find some clue as to why his master would betray him. He soon found himself aboard the Last Resort, a space transport owned and operated by Gorman Camper Vandrake, a former Arcanian scientist turned vagabond, and his companion Jariel. Using his natural charm, Zayne was able to befriend the distrustful Jariel, and the four companions found themselves on the moon, where the final trials had occurred before the massacre. Zayne discovered another party member, a defunct droid, T-1LB, or LB, who had been intentionally scuttled by the Jedi Masters as the droid had inadvertently witnessed and recorded their conversations and plot. After a close encounter with his former master and Republic forces, as well as bounty hunters, Zayne discovered from LB that the four Jedi Masters had received a terrible vision of a returning Sith Lord encased in red armor, killing each of them in turn. His masters had concluded that one of their Padawans was destined for this dark future, and had agreed to kill all of them to prevent even one of them becoming a Sith Lord and ushering in a new age of darkness. After a series of events, Zayne, Griff, Zariel, LB, and Camper fled Terrace, issuing a false prophecy to the five Jedi Masters. Zayne told them that four of them were now marked for death, and that the surviving master would have to confess the crimes that they had all shared in, with the intent of having each of the Jedi Masters turn on one another, as he had not specified which master would survive.
Anger. Still a wanted fugitive by the Jedi and the Republic, Zayne and his crew moved to the planet Vanquo on the edge of the Republic space, scratching out a living as thieves. It was here that the Mandalorians began to assault the worlds of the Republic, and the world was quickly besieged. During the attack, Zayne was able to befriend a Mandalorian deserter named Roland Dyer. At the same time, Jariel had been taken captive by the Mandalorians. Roland agreed to help the diasporic band. The Arcanian had been taken to the Flashpoint Station, once a Republic stellar research laboratory that had been captured by the Mandalorians and turned into an experimental facility. Demigol, a Mandalorian scientist, had been obsessed with the Force and had used the station to torture and research Jedi Crusaders captured on the front lines. Zayne and Roland were able to infiltrate the station, where Zayne was able to publicly fake his death and temporarily adopt the guise of Demigol, while he had been imprisoned within his own facility. Zayne, Roland, Jariel, and surviving Jedi captives were able to escape Flashpoint Station and destroy the facility. Shortly after, Zayne and company, living a low-profile and impoverished lives, attempted to withdraw funds Griff held in secret, the proceeds of his criminal activity. The event escalated when Zayne's father, the banker, who was to give them the funds, was abducted by a notorious bounty hunter duo, the Mumo brothers. Zayne would later discover that the ploy was orchestrated by one of the murderous Jedi Masters, Rana Tay, in an attempt to lure Zayne out of hiding. Zayne vowed to hunt down Rana for using his family to get at him. Through the ordeal, the group had also discovered that Zayne's former master, Lucien Dre, had been using his family connections through the Dre Trust to manipulate several banks to achieve the aims of the rogue Jedi. Carrick was able to arrange safe passage for his father to Dantooine, where the Jedi Council would provide refuge for his family, even if he was still wanted. Bargaining.
Zayne and Griff parted ways with the rest of their company and had stowed away amid a Republic fleet. Assuming false identities and inadvertently serving as a mobile restaurant for soldiers at a Republic staging area, the duo would soon find themselves crossing paths with Carth Onasi and Admiral Saul Carith over the planet Soreko. Having a vision of an impending Mandalorian attack, Zayne exposed himself as a Jedi to warn the Republic forces. Saul Carith recognized Zayne as the alleged murderer of Terrace and attempted to arrest him, but the Mandalorian attack Zayne had predicted commenced, catching the Republic forces largely unprepared. The Mandalorians fired a barrage of nuclear weapons at civilian targets on the world's surface, and Carth Onasi, believing Zayne's predictions, set off tornado warnings in the urban centers, forcing civilians to take shelter, saving many lives, though the nuclear attack would still take its toll. Though the Republic would retreat, Zayne was taken into custody, but would be temporarily released to help Saul and Carth escape a Mandalorian attack on their ship. The three were intercepted on their course to turn the young Jedi renegade over to his master. The Adaska Biomechanical Corporation of Arcania, known simply as Addis Corp, had summoned the Republic representatives with the promise of a weapon that could turn the tide of the Mandalorian War. Saul and Carth agreed to the meeting and took their prisoner with them. Addis Corp was an Arcanian corporation heavily involved in bioengineering and medical research, and had strong financial ties to Zerka Corporation and the Dre Trust. The trio arrived on the Arcanian Legacy, a massive capital ship that served as the headquarters for Addis Corp, and Zayne was transferred to a holding cell. Jariel, Zayne's companion from Terrace and an Arcanian, was, to Carrick's surprise, aboard the ship and briefly spoke with Zayne about her and Camper's situation aboard the vessel before being taken into custody. Zayne learned that Camper, whose real name was Gorman Vandrake, was being held in service to Addis Corp after having escaped the megacorporation years ago. Gorman was the leading scientist on Exogorths, and the leader of Addis Corp had planned on weaponizing the giant space worms through mind control, and ultimately desiring to rule the galaxy through controlling the Mandalorians or the Republic through these armaments. Despite this knowledge, Zayne, still a captive, was unable to immediately assist, though he was now motivated to escape. Further complicating matters, Zayne's former master had been captured by Addis Corp, and the two had been bound together. Agreeing to mutual aid, and suspending their current vendettas in the face of a new enemy in Addis Corp, the pair escaped their confines. Aboard the Arcanian Legacy, Lord Adaska, head of Addis Corp, had invited members of the Mandalorians, including Mandalore the Ultimate himself, as well as Republic representatives, to bid on the new Exogorth-based weapons. Zayne, with the assistance of his crew, including the rogue Mandalorian Roland Dyer, instigated a fight between the Mandalorians and Republic forces aboard the vessel, leading to an all-out battle that destroyed the Arcanian Legacy and the vital research and technology used to control the Exogorths. Lord Adaska was killed, as well as all parties were able to disengage in the chaos, including Zayne and his companions, who Carth allowed to escape. Zayne had almost bargained his life for his friends when Lucian offered a means to escape the doomed Arcanian Legacy. However, Zayne was saved by the Mumo bounty hunters and the Trandoshan Slisk, who had been sent by Griff, having been separated from Zayne since the Mandalorian attack at Soreko.
Depression. Escaping with the bounty hunters, Zayne was informed that Griff had survived the Mandalorian attack, and had made his way back to Taris. However, the world was suffering amidst a Mandalorian siege. Griff, alongside underworld gangs and other freedom fighters, had developed a resistance network to fight back against the occupation. Zayne would return to the world and reunite with his old nemesis turned friend and become embroiled in the war effort. Taris had become a war zone, replete with death, chaos, and destruction, a deranged reflection of the world he had escaped not so long ago. Here, Carrick would meet members of the Resistance, including the Hidden Becks gang, and underworlders such as Biff and Mission Vow, who would influence galactic history on their own. Carrick was able to help coordinate the gangs with the Resistance and the remnants of the Taresian government, who agreed to drop their criminal pursuit of Zayne for his assistance against the Mandalorian occupation. Amidst the struggle against Cassius Fett, who was leading the siege, Carrick was also backstabbed by a childhood friend, Shel Jelavan, whose brother had been one of the murdered Padawans that Carrick had been framed for. Jedi Master Rana Tay had convinced Jelavan to murder Carrick. However, after proving his innocence and proving that it was in fact Rana Tay and the other Jedi Masters that murdered her brother and the other Padawans, Jelavan turned on the Jedi Master and attacked her instead, saving Zayne's life. Rana Tay would survive the lightsaber blow, but was soon crushed under the destruction of the Jedi Temple they had infiltrated amidst a Mandalorian onslaught. Before her death, she revealed that she had been in the service of another Jedi Master, Kyrnda, and this gave Zayne a new lead. Zayne and Griff made their way back to the lower depths of Taris, into the Undercity. There, amongst the poverty-stricken and dangerous Rakghouls, they encountered a Jedi Master named Celeste Morn. She had been dispatched by a secret cabal of Jedi to recovery of a Sith artifact known as the Muir Talisman. She had also been dispatched to find Zayne. However, after getting to know him, she questioned whether he had the aptitude to commit the murders he was being accused of. The trio soon found that the Mandalorians excavating the Undercity had discovered the Mirror Talisman first. They followed it as the Mandalorians transferred it off-world and arrived on the ice-covered world of Jebel. They discovered a Mandalorian staging area, preparing to launch an assault on Alderaan and the core worlds. As the trio went on trying to alert the Republic, they had also successfully passed themselves off as new Mandalorian recruits and were able to operate behind enemy lines. Despite their advantages, many of the Mandalorians they encountered were exhibiting signs of illness before succumbing to the Rakghoul plague. Mandalorian after Mandalorian mutated into the bloodthirsty monsters, and chaos ensued among the ranks. Realizing that the camp had been compromised, Zayne successfully convinced Cassius Fett to quarantine the world to prevent the outbreak from spreading across both Republic and Mandalorian space. Meanwhile, Celeste received orders from Lucien to kill his former pupil. However, Celeste remained skeptical that Zayne would commit such acts of raw violence, especially after witnessing him try to prevent the plague from spreading. Ultimately, Zayne was detained by the Mandalorian forces, where they encountered Pulsifer, an acolyte of Demagol, and obsessed with Force relics. They discovered that the Mirror Talisman had been created by an ancient Sith that would grant its wielder power over others, turning them into subservient Rakghoul thralls. While Pulsifer was wielding the talisman, the jeweled device had a will of its own and detached itself from the mad Mandalorian and attempted to clasp itself around Zayne, sensing his force aptitude. Celeste intercepted the device and ordered it to go to her, where it secured itself around her neck as an ornamented choker. No longer in control of the rat ghouls, the creatures ripped Pulsifer apart, and Celeste was overwhelmed by the power that she now had. She had been overcome with dark side energy and began physically ordering the rat ghouls to attack all the Mandalorians on the world. Struggling with her darker instincts, she revealed that the Jedi Master Kyrnda was in fact Lucien's mother and leader of a secret order of Jedi known as the Covenant. Celeste, feeling herself being lost to the dark side, asked Zayne to strike her down. However, Zayne opted to seal her in an obolete that would hold her in stasis. As soon as this was done, the rat ghouls devolved into mindless monsters and began rampaging across the world and against each other. Zayne and Griff were rescued by Jariel. Alec, Roland, Slisk, Shell, and the Mumo brothers, while Cassius Fett arrived with the Mandalorian fleet, nuking the world to obliterate the rat ghouls, killing everything, including surviving Mandalorians. Zayne was horrified by the Holocaust and lamented not being able to save Celeste, being forced to abandon her in her crypt on the planet. Acceptance.
Now armed with the information Celeste had given him about the secret cabal within the Jedi Order, Zayne set off to expose them for the monsters that killed their Padawans and destroyed his reputation as a fledgling Jedi. He set out to gather evidence of the Covenant, finding the secret location that they had been collecting and storing Sith artifacts, such as the one Celeste had been sent to acquire. They infiltrated the Sanctum of the Exalted and began recording their discoveries before being captured by Covenant researchers and warriors. Here Zayne encountered the second treacherous master who killed his Padawan, Feln, a Fioran Jedi who was an exalted leader and prolific warrior amongst his own people before joining the Jedi. Calculating the exposure of the Sith artifacts and the Covenant too high a risk, the Sanctum and all its secrets were destroyed in a self-destructive blast, while Zayne dueled with the rogue Jedi Master. The destruction devastated the village that surrounded it, killing many of Master Feln's own people. Although Feln set off the detonation, he held Carrick responsible for the destruction that he had wrought. Angered by what Feln had done, however, the Fioran turned against their leader, ganging up and killing him. Having salvaged a handful of Sith artifacts, Zayne and his band of misfits aimed themselves at Coruscant to reveal the truth of the Covenant Cabal to the rest of the Jedi Order, having enlisted the help of a High Council member Vrook Lamar and Vandar Tok'er. Zayne, however, remained wanted by the Republic, and with a little help from Carthonasi, who was now leading a starfighter squadron around Coruscant, was able to evade capture. Despite this, they were still detained by Jedi Master Zamar, third member of the cabal of killer masters who brought Zayne and his allies before the Council as a prisoner. Master Zamar had a change of heart, having seen the continued depths that the Covenant would go to try and stop the Sith from re-emerging, themselves becoming more and more tainted by the dark side, and committing greater atrocities than ones they claimed to prevent. He revealed the truth to the Council, vindicating Zayne and absolving him of the alleged murders. Plotting to go after the Covenant and Jedi Master Kyrnda, Zayne arrived at the Dre estate pretending to be under the influence of the dark side to draw her out. Instead, he was met with her son and Carrick's former master Lucien, and their steward Hazen, a failed Padawan that served the Dre family. Here, the truth became fully revealed. Although the Covenant had been started with noble intentions by Master Kyrnda Dre, after the death of her husband and seeing the devastation wrought by the Sith War, She had been subtly manipulated by the failed Padawan Hazen, who had turned to the dark side after his failure as a Jedi. He plotted to take over the Covenant and subvert the Jedi Order from within. Master Corinda had grown ill and was placed in stasis to preserve her life, but detached her from the ongoings of the Covenant. Hazen would then take control and direct the Covenant to greater and greater acts of darkness. With the ploy revealed, a battle broke out between a Jedi strike team and Hazen and members of the Covenant. Zayne, working with his former master now, was able to subdue Hazen, and Master Lucian Dre directed an orbital blast, sacrificing himself to take out Hazen. However, unbeknownst to the Jedi, Lucian Dre would survive the blast. With the threat of the Covenant finally broken, and Zayne's reputation restored, he was offered a place back in the ranks of the Jedi Order. However, Zayne declined the offer, having spent too much time amongst his friends, including Griff, who he felt a greater loyalty to. They would go on to found an organization called the Rogue Moon Project, with the help of families of the slain Padawans, to offer a service to common people who might be hurt by the actions of the Jedi or wrongly convicted of crimes. He and his band of misfits would go on to continue to pull off cons, usually against those that they thought deserved it, and even brought down a massive intergalactic slaving operation.
Thanks for flying with us. Jordan here. Just wanted to let everyone know what's happening here at the Star Lords podcast. Star Lords is now on Discord. If you would like to join the Star Lords Cantina Discord server, you can find a link in the description or on any of our social media accounts. Reach out with a DM or email. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching the Star Lords podcast. Go ahead and give our page a like and send us a message. You can also email at starlordspodcast@gmail.com. Send us your fan art, Star Wars collections, or fan fictions, and you may even get a feature on one of our pages or even the show. Don't be afraid to offer corrections or add to any of the topics that we discuss on the show. We are also on Patreon, so if you want to help us pay the bills, as well as get a few awesome perks like bonus episodes, access to the private Facebook group, or the VIP section of the Discord server, head on over to patreon.com/starlores and sign up for as little as $1 a month. And finally, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcatcher app or YouTube, as well as sending us a 5-star review on iTunes. This really helps us reach a wider audience. Enjoy the rest of the show.
And welcome again aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
This is Jordan.
And we are currently parked in the lower depths of the Undercity of Terrace. Still here, still exploring, still seeing what uncovered gems are down
And
here.
betting on swoop races, of course.
Of course. And Rakul fights. Some points to talk about here. Zayne Carrick. He's an interesting character. For people who are not familiar with him, he's from the Knights of the Old Republic comic book series that was released shortly after the video games, but before the MMO. Some cool, interesting things to note about him. He isn't particularly strong with the Force, which is noted in the episode, but he does seem to be very lucky. And one idea is that, well, his luck kind of flip-flops.
And I'll say this episode is being released very close to St. Patrick's Day. So
there you go. It was all done on purpose. Yeah. His luck flip-flops a lot because he doesn't necessarily know he's doing it willingly, but he's using the Force subtly to influence his situations. but because he's also not is particularly gifted with the Force, they do also tend to backfire. So he'll sometimes like get into a situation that's very positive, but it will always have like an equal and opposite counter reaction that is maybe negative, which is kind of like a funny running theme throughout like his encounters and adventures. The story, the way it's written, kind of mirrors the KOTOR video games. With kind of the party assembly aspect. I even kind of use that language in it.
Yeah.
Always referring to the band of misfits and whatnot.
It is interesting because Griff, I believe, appears in the video games, doesn't he?
It's a different Griff.
Oh, it
Yeah,
is.
but
Okay.
oh, sorry. So there's two Griffs. There's
Okay.
Griff Hierophant or Hero. I don't know how to say his name. He's like Zayne's like right hand man, ex criminal turned like sidekick.
Okay.
Although Griff sees it the other way around, and Zayne is his sidekick. And then there's Griff, who's Mission's brother,
Right.
Mission Vow's brother, who they encounter in the comics.
Yeah. Oh, that's strange.
So that's actually something I was going to bring up next.
Okay.
A lot of the characters, Carthonasi, Alec,
Right.
Malik,
Yeah.
Squiggermarius, he has a very long last name that's hard to say. They call him Squint. He encounters a lot of characters of high importance from the video game throughout his journeys himself. And I'm going to get into a little bit of that later, but it is an interesting thing to note.
It is sort of like they use Zayne Carrick's story to add some texture to some of the other characters, you know?
Yeah, I had mixed feelings when I first read the comic series myself. I thought it was like too coincidental that like, oh yeah, you know, marketing.
Yeah.
This one guy runs into crosses paths with all the great heroes that we, you know. But I'll delve into that a little bit more later because at first I really didn't like it, and I've kind of warmed to it when we delve into that portion of it. But we'll come back to this idea, so just keep it in the back of your head.
I also just want to note that both the Griffs names are Griffs, like grift with a T.
Yeah.
It does seem to be alluding to that because they're both kind of hucksters.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. Although they're spelled differently. One Griff is with a YPH and the other is IFF.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could imagine they're both.
Did you find out why they both have the same name? Or
no, and you
is
don't
that just
actually get that. I think
coincidental?
it's just coincidental because you don't get a lot of that in.
It's a very
Star
common
Wars.
name.
Yeah,
You know?
everyone's
It's
a
like John.
but in Star Wars, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were kind of tracking the headings of each of these titles, two of the sections of our scripted portion, they follow the pattern of the stages of grief. And it was intentionally done by the author who kind of like wrote the first number of issues. I think like the first, I don't know exactly how many stages of grief there are. It depends who you talk to. There's either 5 or 7. And anyways, he refers to like, I think the first 5 issues as like the stages of grief as Carrick goes through the process of like letting go of his old life, witnessing a super tragic event, the death of his friends and fellow Padawans, and then kind of like processing that until he reaches like a stage of acceptance, which I thought was really cool from the artistic perspective of it. And I kind of wanted to mirror that throughout the episode too. But yeah. So there is an interesting, I think, coincidence with the new stuff. I don't think it was a direct comparison from the Disney canon, but a huge kind of trigger for the story is a dark vision that triggers like an overreaction by the Jedi that leads, in this case, actually has the opposite effect. It doesn't lead someone to the dark side. So if you haven't guessed already, Kylo Ren is in a very similar situation where Luke has a vision of a Dark Lord and he decides to act, and then it actually drives Kylo into the dark side. Whereas in this case, the dark vision maybe expels Zayne from his path as a Jedi, but Zayne still is like good-hearted and good-natured and doesn't allow that to actually turn him into a Sith.
Yeah.
Which I thought was just an interesting coincidence, I guess. And one is a more interesting way of doing it and makes more sense. Like these Jedi who had this vision are already like a dark side cabal within the Jedi Order, and they're pointed as being bad. Like this is bad. They're not doing good things, which I thought was a cool take to have Jedi doing dark things for the greater good. And that
was
whole thing,
Anakin Skywalker LARPing as these people when he killed all those Padawans?
Yeah. No, this was thousands of years before that.
No, I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like maybe he read about this.
He read about this and he's like, I'm going to mimic this.
Yeah, it's like,
don't come to school tomorrow.
It's like when like someone reads like the Columbine Kid.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Don't come to school tomorrow. Shows a picture of a lightsaber. Yeah. On some meme page. Yeah. No. Yeah.
It's a copycat.
Yeah. They I do like the theme of doing bad things in the name of a greater good. I think that's a lesson that we could all learn from in real life.
It always brings big ethical questions and moral ambiguities and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the Jedi definitely do not have their hands clean. They're involved in some dark stuff, and they're doing it in the name of a good cause. They don't want the Sith to return, but they're committing heinous acts like killing children essentially to prevent a new Sith Lord from coming. They're like, well, like what's worse? What's the Sith going to do, right? Kill children too? Like, how are you better than they are? So just an interesting thing. Okay, going back to the narrative coincidences, let's say, of the cameos of all the different characters that you cross paths with. So there's a couple of angles you could play at with this. One, in the world where the Force exists and kind of, I guess, a line of fate exists, you could say that maybe the Force is making these paths cross. And again, alluding to Zayne's like affinity for making kind of like lucky things happen. His luck and the Force influences these intersections of all these like great quote unquote historical figures.
Yeah.
Keep in mind also, I should mention that the comic series actually takes place before the first game.
Right. Yeah.
In case that wasn't clear.
Like a few years before.
Yeah.
Obviously.
So these people that he's crossing paths with aren't the people that you will come to recognize later. They're not particularly necessarily well known,
right?
Or depending on the context. I think Alec was always fairly well known, but
he
wasn't the Darth Malak that was like a galactic terror. He's just a Jedi on a crusade.
Yeah,
under Revan. And even like it's cool in this series you get to see Revan's. He crosses paths with Revan, and Revan's like evolution from like a Jedi on a noble crusade to like adopting the mask and all that stuff it's very cool.
Yeah.
The other thing I would also say is crazy coincidences do happen in real life too, where like weird figures, historical figures will cross paths, and I'll just mention a couple that are interesting. The John Wilkes Booth who killed Abraham Lincoln. This is going kind of off topic, but I just want to point to like, these real life weird random coincidences happen. Anyway, Lincoln's brother, who was already a famous stage actor in the United States, saved Lincoln's son from accidentally getting hit by a train.
Okay.
And then his brother would go on to assassinate his father. But like in completely unrelated circumstances.
Weird.
Abraham Lincoln's son was at a train station. He was like not paying attention. He stumbled onto a train track before a train came. And again, this is a public place. Like any random stranger could have grabbed him and pulled him off the tracks. And it just happened to be John Wilkes Booth's brother.
Huh.
And they saved his life.
Yeah.
And then his brother would go on to kill his dad. There's a guy in Japan who happened to be both at Hiroshima and at Nagasaki. For people that don't know, they were dropped on different days, like 3 days apart, and he survived both nuclear blasts. So maybe he's unlucky in his experience of.
He's like, he got dropped on one. I got to leave this.
Yeah, that's literally what happened. He went. So he was from. I can't remember which one was first, Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but he was from one of them. He's at the other one for work. He's there when it gets bombed. Like it's horrific. Like he describes what happened. Like his, on the ground perspective, what happens was pretty horrific.
Yeah.
But he's like all burned up. He's all beaten up. He's like, okay, I'm going to go home back to my family. And like 3 days later, another nuke hits. And surprisingly, he survives both. Yeah. So weird, like things happen like that. There are two twins in the States who grew up apart, and they both had very similar lives, even though they lived separately. Both men had married twice. Both their first wives were named Linda. Their second wives were named Betty. They both had one son each, and they named both their sons James Allen. And they drove the same car, had similar jobs, vacationed to the same places. And they didn't even know the other one existed. They like were mirrors of each other. And then another example, I guess, that a lot of people talk about is like the Simpsons effect.
Yeah.
Or the Simpsons phenomenon. Simpsons did it first.
Yeah.
Where people will like go back through like episodes. There's so many episodes of the Simpsons now that like people will reference
Right.
weird circumstances like Trump's election and just crazy
Well,
things.
him going up the escalator and announcing his election.
Yeah.
Like what
very precise
yeah.
prediction that the Simpsons did. And there's a few of them that people have pointed to, like, and the funny thing, if you want to look it up online, is like the Simpsons did it first.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's kind of like predicting the future. Now, I'm a bit of a skeptic, so I would argue maybe that when you have that much material to draw from, like it's just some things become inevitable. And
the Simpsons does comment on pop culture like a whole lot.
Yes, so it's they're not totally detached from real life circumstances. And I think you're seeing a similar phenomenon with South Park too, actually, in recent times. And again, South Park has been on for a while. So you have these like shows that lampoon political topics. And so just on the sheer probability of number of episodes and crazy circumstances that they come up with, people will start to match patterns.
Yeah.
And humans are very good at matching patterns. And it goes into the whole thing about, we'll exaggerate the pattern, the things that fit, and then we'll downplay things that don't fit.
Right.
And we'll create this narrative in our mind.
Yeah.
And that's actually this whole roundabout way of saying like a lot of the hero's journey is very similar to that same pattern that people.
Well, there's a book. There's an author I'm a fan of. I haven't read this one book though. Nassim Taleb. Are you familiar with him?
No.
Okay, he's like an economist, and he used to be a professor, and he used to work in finance. But he's super interesting, and he wrote a bunch of big books. Like one of them was called The Black Swan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard of some of these concepts, but I haven't.
The other was Anti-Fragile, I think it was called, or Anti-Fragility, and then but one book he wrote was called Fooled by Randomness, and how people think that like events in markets and in economies are like it's all connected, and there's all the like you can actually predict it with any certainty. And his sort of thesis is like, no, it's actually just like a really random, and you're just like interposing your sort of preconceived notions about what is happening and like sort of filtering it through that. He sort of talked about this concept a lot, where there's actually just like, especially in financial markets, it's very difficult to predict anything. And a lot of times people are actually correct in predicting markets. But if you actually follow those people who predict markets, they predict things all the time that are
they just happen
nine times out of 10, but eventually they'll
get it right. Yeah.
And it's just like anybody could do that. Anyone could be like an economic predictor, because they can just keep making these predictions, and eventually you'll be right about something. And
you could also argue the same thing with fortune tellers and like people who can speak to the dead, right? Like if you fire enough broad questions at somebody, your brain will filter out the things that stick, and then you'll filter out the things that don't.
Yeah.
Right.
And side note to like rabbit trail, but like economic predictions are like notoriously bad. Like it is basically like reading tea leaves. And if you look at like predictions that people have made, they're almost always wrong. And it's sort of irrespective of like political beliefs or anything. It's people who try to make economic predictions are like always very wrong. You can sometimes, if you're very general, like you can sometimes be like generally correct, but again, it's like, I don't know, you can say, well, we're going to get we'll get over 100 days of sunlight this year, right, in this province, and you'll probably be correct most of the time. So I don't know if you're very good at predicting by doing that.
I always pick my stocks by rolling dice. So
Yeah.
yeah. Kind of on the same trend of like weird happenstances and coincidences. Do you know anything about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand?
Yeah, like I know sort of the history and how it led to World War One.
So I'm doing this out of like memory,
Yeah.
so I could be wrong on the details or get the details a little mixed up. But so his assassination, as you said, triggered World War One. He was the emperor, and there was a group of, I believe, Serbian assassins, or it could have been a mixed group of assassins. But they were part of an organization called the Black Hand, which is kind of cool. It's very comic booky.
Yeah.
If it didn't lead to the most disastrous war in human history up until that point. Anyways, they created this big plot to assassinate the emperor while he was in his motorcade, and they had a number of assassins kind of on this parade route to try and take him out. And the first couple of assassins kind of chickened out and didn't make their move from the crowd as they were expected to. That's why they had so many. They were worried someone was going to screw it up, or the plan would backfire or whatever. But one of them happened to throw a bomb at the car. It was the first attempt. The bomb bounced off the vehicle and detonated behind the emperor's car into another car of the motorcade. He was arrested. They escaped down to somewhere else to kind of like keep the emperor safe. Shortly after that, the emperor was going to go to the hospital to visit the people that were in the first explosion, just kind of like as a, thanks. It was like security personnel or whatever, security detail.
Yeah.
And on his way there, so now they're off route. So they had the typical for security for like any kind of high official, you want like a mapped route. You want to know where everyone's going to be. You want to have all your security kind of providing overwatch of the situation to keep your VIP safe. But they had gone off route and gone to this hospital, which kind of screwed up the terrorists' plans because they thought that the emperor would go down one route. So after his visit, they left the hospital and went to go back onto the parade route, but the driver made a wrong turn. And when the driver made a wrong turn, I forget, who's the assassin?
I
forget
don't
his
remember.
name.
No.
Yeah. Anyways, the guy who ended up killing Franz Ferdinand just happened to be sitting at a cafe, and his car rolls up in front of him without any security because they went the wrong way. So like all the security detail went down the regular parade route, and the emperor all alone in his car just parks right in front of his would-be assassin, just delivered on a silver platter after like a failed attempt earlier. Then he just goes up and shoots him and his wife. So again, like it's almost like if you were looking for a pattern, you could say fate deemed that this was going to happen no matter what, right?
It is. Honestly, like for my mind, and like you were talking about that, sorry, you were talking about that, those twins before.
Yeah.
It seems too coincidental, all those events that they would have, like there seems to, in my mind, I'm more willing to entertain the idea that there's, some sort of something meta going on. I don't know what it is, but it's hard to describe. Like maybe it's God, maybe it's something extra dimensional or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
But when you do hear about stuff like that, and even and I had heard that story about the assassination of Ferdinand, and and if you think about World War One is what set up World War II.
Yeah, like
and if you think about World War II, what happened in the events of World War II? World War II is what led to the where the lines were drawn in the Soviet Union. And if you think about the fall of the Soviet Union, that's what's leading to the war in Ukraine right now. It's like all these things
have led up to this moment where you now live and are screwing with your life right now. This guy got killed.
I'm making my gas prices unbelievably high.
We can draw a direct line from the assassination of the heir apparent of the Austro-Hungarian throne to your gas prices right now.
Precisely.
Fate has deemed that we would live in this moment. Yeah. So, history, if you look through it, like there are crazy circumstances and things like that seem to follow these weird patterns. Another concept that I don't necessarily consider accurate, I guess, is synchronicity.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, is like synchronicities.
Yeah. So
like Jung's idea.
Yeah, I'm not big on Jungian psychology personally.
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
For those that are,
it's kind of weird.
Yeah, I don't totally buy into it, but if you want to explain it a little bit.
Like the synchronicity?
Yeah.
It's just like it's like when it could be anything. It's more just like coincidences, but maybe coincidences that are speaking to you in a certain way or are meaningful to you in a certain way. And they'll like pop up, like maybe it'll be you were just talking about some topic, and then a friend out of nowhere brings up that same topic
the next day
or something. And they had no idea you were talking about said topic, right? Like that would be like a synchronicity. But they can be all sorts of things. They can be objects. They can be
people can come to like interpret that to be signs,
right?
Like, and then you have like the real life psychological effect. I forget what it's called, but like when you buy a car and suddenly you see that car everywhere, right?
Right. Yeah. Like pareidolia.
Yeah, pareidolia. Yeah. So again, the human brain is a master at seeing patterns and chaos.
Yeah, and like, to be fair, like that's helped our survival as a species.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's how we figured out like things like crops and animal migrations and stuff like that, right?
Or looking for patterns.
We have to look for these patterns,
seasonal patterns.
Yeah, so that we can survive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, there's some weird stuff that maybe isn't totally explained by your brain imposing a pattern, and there does seem to be a pattern arising out of chaos.
Yeah, totally.
So moving away, I guess, from some of the synchronicity topics here, let's talk about big bad corporations. This comic book, again, has a couple of those for us to keep in our mind. Ada's Corp is a big one, big medical company.
Big pharma,
a big pharmaceutical company. We wouldn't know anything about them being untrustworthy. And then Zerka Corporation, of course, comes up in this as well, which we know even from the video games. They're less than favorable business practices, let's say.
Yeah.
Again, in real life, we do have some big bad corporations. Mitsubishi, manufacturing Imperial Japanese jet fighters in World War II. Ford, being a known collaborator of the Nazis. Volkswagen, being actually made by the Nazis and currently one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world. Hugo Boss, being a designer of the Nazi uniforms, also being a big fashion brand. And Fanta, which was actually made by the Nazis as a replacement for Coca-Cola after they were embargoed.
Man, how do these guys do it? If I do a Hail Hitler, I'm canceled.
They take all your money.
Fired from my job.
And then here are these companies that have direct links to parties and are some of the biggest companies in the world. So imagine
this is
that.
Not fair. I don't like this.
Yeah, government and big corporations, big tech and biotech. Never anything wrong with any of that.
Nope.
And then one final kind of quick note, just from the episode, Celeste Morn. She will be coming up again. She may get her own episode. I don't know if I'm going to tell her story through other episodes, but she has a very interesting arc that goes over multiple eras of Star Wars. So if I didn't give it away yet, no, she's not dead. And she will crop up again later. So for our fans who have listened to us ramble for this far out, just keep your ears open for her in future episodes.
Indeed. All right. Let's get into some housekeeping, and we'll start with the mailbag. So one of our listeners sent us a message in regards to episode 50, Galactic Corporatism. They had brought up that we sort of neglected a number of large corporations, which is probably true. I think some of them I did speak about, but maybe we didn't really spend that much time on them. So Jefferson, he said, Some of the big ones, he said we didn't really talk about the mining guild. What was another one here? The banking clan. And I don't see any other ones.
Cloud City, which may
Which
or may
isn't
not
real.
necessarily be. It's almost like a city corporation. So
Well, it's like a mining colony,
yeah.
really.
So like how
That's-
much? To be fair, like the whole thing could be owned and operated almost like an oil and gas.
Yeah.
I guess you could say refining
Maybe, yeah.
camp, but it's more permanent. But we definitely talked about Cloud City and its makeup in the Lando Calrissian episode.
Yes, we have mentioned it in previous episodes. I have to go back and look at that episode. I believe I did mention the mining guild, and I think the banking clan, if I remember correctly, was very tied into the Trade Federation, and so it's almost like mentioning one and the other. Like I guess they are two separate entities, but they seem to like use like the Trade Federation use the banking clan to sort of fund a lot of their operations. So I don't know.
I will also say
It seemed a bit redundant to talk a whole lot about the banking clan.
Also, a lot of these corporations are pretty heavily featured through the Clone Wars, which is also where we're going to get to with them. So there's no point like talking about all of them when we're just going to mention them again when we discuss things like the Separatist Alliance, and like a lot of them are where these groups are mentioned and where they come from.
Yeah.
So just hang tight. We'll get to them eventually.
Yeah.
He also mentions Westar, who manufacture Jango Fett's blasters and Cad Bane's guns as well. Again, also Star Wars has so many companies. Like we could literally just sit here and read a list of companies to you, but that wouldn't make for very engaging.
And a lot of them
listening.
have like significant props in universe that are
like every ship, every item has a manufacturer, which I love. I love the depth that Star Wars goes to. But like if I'm just gonna sit here and read names of companies to you, I don't know if you'd necessarily want to sit through that.
So yeah, that's all I would say about that. We probably could have spent more time on like the mining guild and stuff for sure. I don't necessarily.
I think they're gonna come up again with the CIS and a lot of future episodes. There's these episodes, unless we make them like 5 hours, 10 hours long, like
we kind of have to condense and like sort of pick and choose what hills we're gonna die on.
Yeah,
right?
and then if there is something we want to bring up again later, we definitely can. So.
Yeah. All right. We got another one from Robin. And she was he or she, not sure. Sorry if I misgendered you. They were bringing up the Yuuzhan Vong. And we're mentioning specifically because we were talking about how fast or how long it would take to travel from one galaxy to another, even at light speed. It seems to be. I can't really fathom how you could do it, but here I'll just sort of read some of the email. You say that traversing the distance between galaxies and centuries is unreasonable. This is not necessarily true, depending on the speed they travel at. Since the Star Wars universe has its own version of general relativity, theory of universal reference, we can assume that they have similar relativistic rules to us. Time dilation is pretty well known. Less known is length contraction. In short, the faster you move, the shorter you perceive distances to be. You can look up graphs of this easily. If you move at 90% the speed of light, the apparent length is about 45% of the original length. So maybe half of what I'm not very good at math or science, but yes, I do know of like the theory of relativity and somewhat understand. I don't know, Christian, what do you think? Do you think that that's a plausible argument that like the time that the people who are traveling are experiencing is much shorter than the actual time that me waiting for them to arrive to me is.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I get what you're saying. It's kind of hard to put into words.
Yeah.
I don't like, this is all theoretical physics, man.
Yeah.
I'm not a physicist. People will argue for and against, and both are equally plausible to me because I just hear a lot of math and science that I don't understand fully. And I think the people putting forward these arguments probably have, like, you know, for and against elements of each of their theories. So I guess I'm going to say I withhold my opinion because I'm not well enough educated on it to make an opinion.
Yeah. All we'll say is perhaps there is a plausible way for a species to travel between galaxies where they wouldn't go completely extinct in the process. But yeah, interesting thoughts. Thanks, Robin. Also, we just wanted to give a big shout out to all of our new patrons. One of them, Mike, has upped his pledge. Thank you, Mike. And then another new patron is, I like this name, Voltstag. I don't know if that's your real name, but thank you very much for becoming a patron. And thanks to all our patrons because you help us pay for this and pay the bills and keep the show going.
We're also working our way through a backlog of messages. I know there's a couple of you out there that still haven't gotten responses. Please hang in there. I am very sorry. Yeah. We got a lot of stuff going on in our personal lives.
Yeah. And for me, my wife is expecting any day now as of recording this. It's about mid-March right now. We're recording mid-March 2022, and she's expecting our second son of a second son, because I am a second son. So once that happens, definitely no guarantees that I will be getting back to you.
Yeah. So just bear with us.
And Christian had a child like back in November as well.
Yeah. So I'm still balancing that and a second job, which, you know, if our generous patrons would provide enough that I wouldn't need a second job and could do this full time or at least part time, that would be fantastic. So
indeed. Yeah, but we'll definitely keep trying to I know I'm kind of slow, but I still try to.
Yeah.
Especially like.
We see you. We know you're there. We feel really bad that you're still waiting.
Yeah. But keep reaching out to us. Keep connecting to us. Email, direct message on any of the socials, also on our Discord. Also, if you're having issues with the Discord server, just give us a message. Always seem to have trouble with the link, and we'll try and give you an updated link if you can't find one that works. All right. I think that's it.
Yeah, let's get out of here. We're both feeling a little sick too, I might add, which is bad when you're in a raccoon infested area. It could be a sign of something worse.
Indeed. Peace.